Mylene had not uttered a single word since the day she watched her father die. The oppressive silence she carried settled like a shroud over her mother's heart, a constant, unspoken reminder of their loss. But when the lone rancher began carving figures from scraps of wood, a faint light flickered in the girl's otherwise hollow eyes. No one could have predicted that those small, whittled figures would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. The dust was a permanent resident of Prosperity Creek. It never truly settled, hanging in the arid air like a million unspoken prayers, coating every surface with the color of rust and regret. Sue stood at the window of her small laundry, her gaze fixed on the main street through glass so clouded with steam and grime that it made the world outside appear distorted, as if submerged underwater. Her hands, pruned and aching from a long morning of scrubbing collars and cuffs, trembled as she gripped the worn window sill. 9 months had passed since they brought Wei home. 9 months since her husband's body had arrived on a makeshift stretcher, his clothes torn and stained with a dark, terrible crimson. The official report had called it a robbery gone wrong, a tragic but common misfortune on the frontier. The wounds on his body, however, told a different story, one of a desperate struggle, of a man who had fought fiercely for his life. "Mama," the whisper was so faint, so fragile, Sue almost missed it. She turned sharply. Her daughter, Mylene, stood in the doorway, her small frame casting a long, thin shadow in the fading afternoon light. The child's sleek black hair, which Sue usually tied back in neat, tight braids, hung limp around a face that had grown too gaunt. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes held the same vacant emptiness they had carried since that terrible night. "What is it, my little blossom?" Sue knelt beside her, her heart aching as she pulled the small, frail body against her own. Mylene's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her face flushing with the immense effort of forming words that refused to come. "It's all right," Sue whispered, her own voice cracking with emotion. "You don't have to speak." But it was never a choice. The words had been stolen from Mylene that night, taken from her as she watched her father die, crouched behind barrels of lye while shadows with familiar voices moved through the ensuing chaos. The settlement of Prosperity Creek had sprouted from the arid ground, built on the promise of gold and the eventual arrival of the railroad that would one day connect them to the distant coast. But Prosperity had a dark underbelly, bringing with it dangers the town's founders had never anticipated. Fear had become a silent occupant in every home, and for Sue and Mylene, the only Chinese family in town, that pervasive fear was compounded by a chilling, bitter isolation. At 29, Sue felt ancient, worn down by the twin burdens of grief and the constant struggle to keep the laundry running by herself. It was their sole means of survival, a fragile foothold in a land that still viewed them as perpetual foreigners, outsiders to be tolerated but never truly accepted. A sharp, authoritative knock at the door made them both jump. Sue peered through a clear patch on the window to see Marcus Thorne, the town's most powerful and ruthless merchant, standing on her porch. Beside him stood Dr. Finch, his black medical bag clutched in one hand like a shield. Sue opened the door just a crack, keeping Mylene shielded behind her. "Gentlemen." Thorne, a large, imposing man whose wealth was as conspicuous as the gold watch chain stretched tightly across his brocade vest, dispensed with pleasantries. "Sue, we need to talk about the girl. About what's best for her." "She is fine where she is," Sue said, her voice a low, steady defense. "No child should go without speech for this long," Dr. Finch added, his tone a carefully calibrated mixture of pity and condescension. "I've exhausted every treatment I know. Perhaps she requires a different kind of care." "Different care?" Sue's grip on the door tightened. Thorne cleared his throat, adopting the smooth, reasonable tone he used when closing a business deal. "There's an institution in San Francisco. They specialize in cases like this. For children who have been damaged." The word hung in the humid air like smoke from a cheap cigar. "My daughter is not damaged." "Sue," Dr. Finch insisted, his professional patience wearing thin. "She hasn't spoken in 9 months. She barely eats. This isn't a natural state of grief. She needs professional help, the kind we simply can't provide for her here." Sue recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look men used when discussing a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be removed for the greater good. She felt Mylene's small, cold hand slip into hers. The child was listening, absorbing every word that painted her as broken, as something to be sent away. The truth is, Thorne continued, his voice shifting again, becoming all business, this settlement is changing. When the railroad finally comes through, investors will need to see a thriving, normal community. And my silent Chinese daughter isn't part of that normal community, is she? Shu finished for him, her voice as cold and hard as iron. She looked from Thorne's calculating eyes to Finch's feigned concern. I said no, she repeated, her voice carrying a finality that made both men take an involuntary step back. Mylene stays with me. After they left, Shu held her daughter close on the porch as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and bruised purple. I won't let them take you, she whispered into Mylene's hair. I promise, but promises were fragile things in a place where a man's life was worth less than the gold in his pockets. He appeared a few days later, a lone rider on a steady buckskin horse. Shu first saw him from her window as he dismounted in front of the general store. He was tall and weathered, with a quiet confidence that set him apart from the boisterous miners and merchants who populated the town. He moved with an unhurried purpose, wasting no motion, his keen eyes taking in everything around him. She recognized him as Isaac Holt, a rancher who kept to himself on a spread miles out of town. He was known as a man of few words and unquestionable honesty, but not for his sociability. Later that day, she heard a sound outside, the rhythmic scrape of a wood plane. Stepping onto the porch, she found Isaac Holt mending the broken section of her front railing, which had been damaged during a storm weeks ago. A rifle was propped nearby against a post, but his hands were occupied with his tools. "Can I help you?" Shu asked, her hand instinctively going to the door frame, ready to retreat. He looked up, his blue eyes clear and direct. He touched the brim of his dusty hat. "Noticed your railing was busted. Figured it was a hazard for the little 1-inch. I don't have money to pay for such work." "Didn't ask for any," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. He returned to his task, each movement precise and efficient. The sheer simplicity of his gesture caught her off guard. In a town where every favor came with a price tag, this act of unsolicited kindness was a profound mystery. Mylene appeared in the doorway behind her, her dark eyes fixed on the stranger. Isaac noticed her and set down his tools. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible so as not to startle her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden wren. "This is for you," he said to Mylene, his voice surprisingly gentle. He set the bird on the newly repaired railing. "Found a good piece of cedar up in the hills. Reminded me of a canyon wren." Mylene took a tentative step onto the porch, then another. Shu held her breath. It was the first time her daughter had voluntarily moved toward a stranger since Wei's death. Mylene reached for the bird, her small fingers tracing the delicate, fanned lines of its wings and tail. "Pretty," Mylene whispered. The word was so soft, so airy, Shu almost gasped. But Isaac heard it clearly. His serious, sun-creased face broke into a small, rare smile. "Yes," he agreed, his eyes on the child. "Very pretty." Mylene clutched the bird to her chest and retreated back into the house without another word. But for the first time in 9 long months, she had spoken. That evening, Shu found her daughter sitting on her bed, turning the wooden bird over and over in her hands, studying it as if it held a great secret. "You like him?" Shu asked softly. Mylene nodded, her eyes still on the carving. "He has quiet hands. Like Papa." The simple observation struck Shu with unexpected force. In all the months of condescending doctors and pitying neighbors, no one had understood. Mylene's silence came not from a broken mind, but from a shattered trust. Isaac Holt, the reclusive rancher, had somehow seen past the silence without even trying. "Mama," Mylene's voice was barely a whisper, but it was there. "The night Papa died, there were men I knew." Shu's heart stopped. "What do you mean, my love?" Mr. Thorne's voice. I heard it in the dark. And Dr. Finch. They were talking about Papa's ledger. They said he knew too much. The room seemed to spin. She gripped the bedsheets, her knuckles white. Her daughter's words were confirming a terrible, cold suspicion she had never dared to voice, even to herself. Wei had been a meticulous bookkeeper. Beyond the laundry accounts, he kept a personal ledger, a detailed journal where he noted down everything he observed in town, unusual shipments, questionable land sales, quiet deals made in back rooms. Are you certain, Mylene? The little girl nodded, tears finally streaming down her face, a dam of grief breaking at last. I tried to tell Sheriff Brody, but he said my mind was playing tricks on me. He said I was just confused by the grief. Oh, my sweet girl, she pulled Mylene into her arms, feeling the shuddering release of 9 months of suffocating silence. I believe you. I believe every word. For the first time since her husband's death, Shu felt not just grief, but a cold, burning rage. Isaac returned the next morning with a cart loaded with firewood. Shu met him at the gate, Mylene close beside her, clutching the carved wren. Thought you might be running low, he said simply, his eyes flicking from Shu's determined face to Mylene's tear-streaked one. Isaac, Shu began, her voice low and urgent. I need to talk to you. About something my husband was working on. Something Mylene saw. He listened intently as she recounted her daughter's story, his expression growing darker and harder with each word. He showed no surprise, only a grim, weary understanding. Thorne's been buying up land on the quiet for months, Isaac said, his voice flat. Land the railroad will need. I've heard rumors of strong-arm tactics to drive people out, but murder. Your husband must have found proof. His ledger, Shu whispered. They were talking about his ledger. I don't know where it is. If Wei knew he was in danger, he would have hidden it well, Isaac said, his gaze sweeping over their small home. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look. They searched the small house and the steam-filled laundry from top to bottom. It was Isaac who finally noticed the loose floorboard under the main washing basin, a spot constantly damp from overflow, a place no one would willingly want to search. Underneath, wrapped carefully in oilcloth to protect it from the moisture, they found Wei's ledger. Shu's hand shook as she opened it. Page after page of her husband's careful script, in both English and Chinese, detailed Thorne's entire scheme, fraudulent land deeds, records of intimidation, and a list of payments made to Dr. Finch for falsified medical opinions and to Sheriff Brody for his complicity and silence. It was enough to see them all hang. He knew everything, she breathed, tracing her husband's handwriting. A sound from outside made them both freeze, the jingle of harnesses and the heavy tread of multiple horses. Isaac moved swiftly to the window. It's Thorne, he said, his voice taut. And the sheriff. They aren't here for a friendly chat. He looked at Shu, his eyes full of grim purpose. Take the ledger. Take Mylene. Go out the back and head for the creek. Follow it north until you reach the old hunter's cabin by the Twin Oaks. Wait for me there. What about you? She cried, her heart seizing with fear. I'll buy you time, he said, picking up his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. They're expecting a scared widow, not a fight. I'll give them 1 inch. Isaac, no. They'll kill you. They'll kill you and your daughter if they find that book, he countered, his gaze unwavering. Now go. I'll find you. I promise. Shu hesitated for only a second before grabbing Mylene's hand. As they slipped out the back door, they heard Thorne's voice boom from the front porch. The sharp crack of a rifle echoed a moment later. They ran, the ledger clutched to Shu's chest, the sound of Isaac's lonely battle fading into the vast, indifferent landscape behind them. They reached the cabin near dawn, exhausted, scratched, and terrified. Shu barricaded the flimsy door and waited, praying to ancestors she hadn't spoken to in years. Isaac found them just after sunrise. He was bruised and his shirt was torn, but he was alive. Lost them in the canyons, he said, collapsing into a rickety chair. They'll be watching the roads, but they won't think to look this far out for a while. You saved us, Shu said, her voice thick with emotion as she gently tended to a cut on his forehead with a damp cloth. He looked over at Mai Lian, who was watching him with wide, solemn eyes, the wooden wren still held tightly in her hand. A man's got to stand for something, he said quietly. Your father stood for the truth. It's the least I could do. They spent 3 days hidden in the cabin while Isaac planned their next move. He knew of a U.S. Marshal who was due to arrive in the next county seat within the week. He was their only real hope for justice. During those days, an unspoken bond formed between the three of them, a quiet domesticity in the heart of the wilderness. Isaac taught Mai Lian how to identify bird calls and track deer. Mai Lian, in turn, showed him the Chinese characters her father had taught her, carefully drawing them in the dirt with a stick. On the third night, as they sat by the small, crackling fire, Mai Lian spoke the words that had been building in her heart. Isaac, are you going to be our family now? The question hung in the still, pine-scented air. Isaac looked at Shu, his gaze searching her face, asking a question of his own. I think, Shu said softly, her heart feeling fuller than it had in a very long time, that would depend on what Isaac wants. I want to see this through, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. I want to see you both safe. And after that? I want to help you rebuild what they took from you. Then, yes, Shu said, the single word carrying the weight of a new beginning, a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Yes. With Isaac's guidance, they made the treacherous journey, avoiding roads and towns. The U.S. Marshal, a stern but fair man named Roberts, listened to their story and studied Wei's ledger with growing outrage. The evidence was irrefutable. The return to Prosperity Creek was tense. Thorne, Finch, and Sheriff Brody were arrested, their confident bluster evaporating in the face of federal authority. The trial was swift. Wei's ledger laid out the cold, calculated facts of the conspiracy, but it was Mai Lian's testimony that sealed their fate. Standing before the court, her voice clear and steady, she recounted every detail of the night her father was murdered, her unwavering testimony leaving no room for doubt. After the verdicts were read, the townspeople gathered outside, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and dawning respect. Shu, Isaac, and Mai Lian stood together on the courthouse steps. My father died protecting the truth, Mai Lian told the crowd, her small voice carrying an unexpected strength that commanded their attention. Justice came because a good man helped us when no one else would. He taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who choose to protect each other. Her eyes found Isaac in the crowd, and she smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. 6 months later, Shu and Isaac were married. They took over the laundry, but they also bought a small plot of land just outside of town, the very same plot Thorne had tried to steal through murder and deceit. Together, they built a home that blended two different worlds, a place of quiet peace and unshakable strength. Mai Lian grew up moving easily between cultures, her voice a bridge between the rich Chinese heritage of her father and the rugged independence of the American West she shared with Isaac. She never forgot the long months of silence, but she came to understand that it had been a shield, a silent vessel protecting a truth so powerful it could bring down tyrants and cleanse a town of its corruption. Years later, she would tell her own children the story of the quiet rancher and the small wooden wren, a story of how a single, simple act of kindness could give a voice back to the voiceless and prove that even in the dustiest, most forgotten corners of the world, hope could build a home.